Hello, my name is Dr. Jared Staudt. I'm the Associate Superintendent for our Catholic schools here in the Archdiocese of Denver. And I'd like to give you a short virtual tour of the cathedral. There are so many beautiful sites that we have in our Cathedral Basilica of the Immaculate Conception. And I'd like to just share some of the general features of the Basilica, and in particular, some of the art that we have within this great church. So as you are driving through Denver, you're going to pass the Capitol on your right-hand side as you're driving up Colfax, and you actually go up the hill, and there it is, our beautiful Gothic Cathedral. We know it's a Gothic church because you see the beautiful spires, those towers that are reaching up towards the heaven, and you see all those pointed arches. That's one of the main features of a Gothic church, which arose in the Middle Ages in France, with these pointed arches and the soaring towers that lead you up to the heavens. Our cathedral was built, it was completed in 1912 in that neo-Gothic style. So looking back to the Middle Ages and bringing that style into the modern world. As you walk up to the front of the church, you glance up at these amazing spires that rise 210 feet into the air, and you get a sense of what I'm talking about, of these towers leaning you up to the heavens, to God. We see these beautiful bronze doors that reflect both the Archdiocese. The ones on the right and the left have the coat of arms of an archbishop, and the one in the center has the coat of arms of the Pope, showing that as a basilica, the cathedral has a special link to the Pope. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what it means to be a basilica. But as you enter through those main doors, these beautiful brass doors, you are entering into a different realm. You're leaving the ordinary realm of the earth behind, and you're going into a sacred space, a place that is like heaven on earth. Which is why when you walk into the church, the first thing that you're going to see is the Baptismal Font, because it's there, as we receive the grace of baptism, that we enter into this new heavenly world, where we are sharing in the very life of God. So that's what you need to actually come into this spiritual world, is you need the grace of baptism. And that's why the baptismal font is many times in the back of the church, because it shows us the difference between ordinary life and the spiritual life that we get from our church. As you continue to walk into the church, you enter into what we call the Nave, which actually means ship in Latin. And this big church is like a ship, this spiritual realm that I was talking about that gives us a refuge from the rest of the world and all the troubles of life. It's an amazing space. When you look up, you can really see how high it is. The ceiling is over 68 feet in the air. And once again, these arches, these Gothic arches, point us up to the heavens to show that this is a different kind of space. You can see these ribbed arches when you look up. I mean, when you actually are in the church looking upwards, it definitely transports you into another world. And the whiteness of this ceiling does give you that sense of being in this heavenly realm. You can see that the arches here are called rib arches because they're like our own ribs. You can see that they come up from the walls and create that pointed Gothic arch that we've been talking about. But if we turn backwards and look back towards the entrance of the church, we see this huge organ in the back. And for all of these special ceremonies that the bishop is doing within the cathedral, we have a special choir and very beautiful music that accompanies these ceremonies to show that we are singing with the angels. It's another way in which we're really entering into this heavenly space through the beautiful music itself. And that's why even every Sunday at all of our churches, we want this beautiful sacred music to go along with our prayers. Right above the organ is the only rose window of the church. You can see that it's in a flower kind of shape, and in the center of it is Saint Cecilia, who is the patroness of music. And so you can even see in the stained glass, she is playing a little organ there. But the cathedral is known especially for its windows. The cathedral has more stained glass windows than any other church in North America. That's an amazing statement. We have more stained glass here in our cathedral in Denver than any other church in the whole continent. And it's very beautiful stained glass. I have a close-up here of the stained glass of the miracle at Cana when Jesus turned the water into wine, which is the first window when you look over to your left. These windows were made by a company from Munich in Germany, and they did a really amazing job of capturing these beautiful details, as you can see in this particular window. But the windows in the back show us scenes from the life of Mary, like her presentation in the temple, some of the miracles of Jesus, the calming of the seas, the division of the loaves, an image of Jesus with the children, and then also a scene of St. Paul preaching in Athens. But as we enter farther into the church, we see that the stained glass on the left and the right side focuses on the mysteries of the Rosary. And this is a particularly beautiful one, which is near the entrance of the church off on the right side, and what we call the transept, which is like the arms of the church going off the two sides of the coronation of Mary when she was crowned Queen of Heaven and Earth. And you can see the very nice rainbow behind her there. And God the Father and Jesus together are placing the crown upon her head. But the largest windows in the church are in the ends of those transepts on the right and left side of the proclamation of Mary as Mother of God, which is on the right, which was at the Council of Ephesus in 431. It's an enormous stained glass, really an amazing piece of art. And on the left side, we have the proclamation of Mary as the Immaculate Conception, because that's the name of the church. The whole cathedral is really in honor of Our Lady. And Pius proclaimed her to be the Immaculate Conception in 1854, which means that when God created Mary, He made her without any stain of original sin and with a fullness of grace. And so that proclamation was in 1854, and remember the church was completed in 1912, so that was still a pretty new event as the church was being built. We also have underneath these two large windows on both sides the saints whose teachings helped the church to make these proclamations. And so we have rows of some of the most important saints and theologians of church history underneath those large windows. And finally, the last set of stained glass we see is above the altar. And you can see right in the center there is the crucifixion of Jesus. And then there's, on both sides of it, other images that are Eucharistic. We have the offering of Melchizedek, the high priest, who offered bread and wine in the presence of Abraham. And on the right side, the Last Supper. So how do these things go together? Well, during the Mass, the sacrifice of Jesus is made present to us. But He gives His body and blood, offering it to the Father, to us also as a meal. And so we see the Last Supper and the crucifix coming together. And there's a reason why that's right above the altar. And that same theme of the Passion can really be traced throughout the church. We see this in every church of our Archdiocese. We have the 14 Stations of the Cross, which enable us to make a little pilgrimage with Jesus as He is suffering and giving His life for us. These particular stations are made out of alabaster, so it's like a powdery stone that is mixed and then molded into these scenes. And this particular one is Jesus falling one of those 3 times. And you can see the beautiful detail that's able to be captured in these stations. With all the other figures, the soldiers around Him, one of the soldiers whipping Him, trying to get Him up and to keep going along the way. And when you're standing right before the altar, we can look up the ceiling once again, and we see the vaulting here comes together as a crossing. And the church is actually shaped like a cross itself. And so you can really get a good sense of this, that this ship of the church that I was talking about is also a place where we come together under the cross to receive the salvation of Christ. And so the way that the church designed is also showing us that this is a place of salvation. But we want to now turn to the sanctuary itself. And so this picture gives us a good panorama of the sanctuary. You can see in the center is the high altar. And the high altar goes along very well with the Gothic Cathedral with its own little mini spires also pointing us upwards. And then we have an altar of the Sacred Heart to the left, and another altar dedicated to Mary on the right. But we're going to focus a little bit more on this high altar. You can see there's a statue of Mary, the Immaculate Conception, there at the top of this altar. And at the bottom is another image of the Last Supper, which is a marble relief. It's very beautiful white marble from Carrara, Italy, which was Michelangelo's favorite quarry for his own beautiful marble statues. And the high altar was carved in Italy and then brought over here and assembled. And right in the center there, you can see the tabernacle with the green veil in front of it. This is where Jesus' presence in the Eucharist is kept after the Mass, so that you can come into the church and pray in the presence of Jesus. To the left of the high altar, we see the bishop's chair, which is called the cathedra. It's where the cathedral gets its name. It's the bishop's church, as I mentioned, and this is the bishop's chair, the symbol of his teaching authority. And unlike in other churches where the priest will preach from the pulpit, the bishop actually preaches from his chair, which once again shows that he is the main teacher of the faith for our archdiocese. If we look over at the right, we see the pulpit, the place where the Word of God is proclaimed, and the pulpit is being held up by these statues of the four evangelists, showing us that we are proclaiming the good news of Jesus and the gospel, and then the priest will, of course, then preach from this pulpit as well, when the bishop is not here preaching himself. And then farther to the right of the pulpit, we see the Umbraculum, which is the Latin name for the umbrella. And this umbrella was sent by the Pope as a symbol that this church is not only a cathedral, it's also a basilica. A basilica is a church that is connected to the Pope himself. And the Pope gives this designation to particularly beautiful churches and historic churches. And it was Pope John Paul II who made our cathedral into a basilica. Now, the umbrella is usually closed, as you see it here, and it is opened only when the Pope himself comes to visit the basilica. And so, has this umbrella ever been opened? Yes, once, when John Paul II himself came to the church during World Youth Day in the August of 1993. And so we have opened that umbrella once, and hopefully we'll be able to open it again someday. If we look all the way over then to the left side of the sanctuary, there is something that's actually brand new there, and that is this marble tomb of servant of God, Julia Greeley. Julia was a slave born in Missouri who was then freed and came to work in Denver. And she became Catholic here in Denver and became an apostle to the poor and an apostle of the Sacred Heart. So she herself was pretty poor, but she would actually go around and carry bags of food, even mattresses on her back to people who were in need. And she would go around, especially to firefighters, but to anyone else, and hand out little pamphlets of the Sacred Heart. And so you can see on her tomb, there is a carving of the Sacred Heart right there in the center. So Julia is in the process of becoming a saint. And so she is really a great figure for us to pray to here in the Archdiocese. And hopefully we'll be able to celebrate her beatification and then her canonization as she does become a saint. So as we turn around to leave the church, we want to take what we experienced here with us. Now, I hope you can actually come and visit the cathedral someday and experience all these beautiful sights. But when we go into the church and we enter into this heavenly realm, Jesus is speaking to us. And he is teaching us in so many ways, even through the beautiful art and architecture, but most importantly, through eating his body and drinking his blood. He really changes us into himself. And at the end of Mass, when the priest says, "Go," and many times even says, "Go and proclaim the good news," we are sent out on a mission. And we want to take what we experience into the church, out into the world, to share our faith with others, to help make other disciples. So thank you so much for joining me for this virtual tour. And once again, I hope that you can come down and experience this on your own sometime.